Good morning, and thank you for joining us for the first meeting of the Bipartisan Infrastructure Law and Jobs Act. This is the Tribal Task Force meeting. My name is Christine Firethunder. I'm the Director of the Governor's Office on Tribal Relations, and I'm also the Policy Advisor to Governor Doug Ducey. So let's talk a little bit about who we are and what we're trying to accomplish here. The short version is that we are trying to attract as many of these competitive dollars to the state of Arizona. So it doesn't necessarily have to be a state project or a county project. We're just really looking forward to working with all the tribes and how is it that we can leverage these funds to create more economic development and especially infrastructure. So roads, water projects, and broadband, that's going to be really important. So let's just start there for a minute, and then I will introduce Cindy Patak. Cindy has joined us as the Arizona IIJA Task Force Program Manager. Cindy, can you introduce yourself and talk a little bit about your expertise?
Thank you, Christine. First of all, I just want to say I'm really grateful to have this opportunity here in Arizona to head up, to program manage the task force and to actually work with Christine one-on-one to work exclusively with Indian tribes under this tribal task force. I'm fairly new to the state of Arizona. I built a career in federal service at the Federal Highway Administration in Washington, D.C., and I have spent a lot of years standing up discretionary programs, evaluating grant applications, providing a lot of technical assistance, and trying to build capacity. I moved to Arizona specifically to take a position with the Economic Development Administration to aid in the state's economic recovery and, focusing pretty heavily on tourism and the impact that the pandemic had on Indian tribes. I fell in love with Arizona and decided to stay, and I'm happy to be here again, working with Christine and the state with the governor's office on this task force. And I think what Christine and I would like to do together with you, where there's interest, of course, is to kind of help you sift through these opportunities. There are over 300 programs under the infrastructure bill, over 150 for which tribes are eligible. So there's a large menu. And I think we both feel that it's important to be discerning here. So how do you kind of sift through all of this stuff and yet be strategic enough to focus on things that will really bring positive investments into your tribe? So that's really why we're here. I think we're very open. Today's our first day. And I think it's important that we hear from you what your needs are. And I know between Christine and myself, we're going to really try hard to accommodate you. So thank you, Christine. Thank you for the intro.
Okay, great. Thanks, Cindy. Okay, opportunities under the BILJA, searching for funding opportunities. So what is actually the BILJA Tribal Task Force? So it's mostly Cindy and I leading the Tribal Task Force, and the other members are composed of representatives of each tribe. So we've had one workshop previously to talk about some of the items that are of priority to the tribes. And so far the interest seems to be around broadband. And for Cindy and I think that we've determined that transportation and broadband is where we're really going to find the most leverage for Arizona. Well, why is that? And we can talk more about that later. But really right now is that we're trying to attract more people to join us. And what does that mean by join us? There really isn't anything in it for us other than to provide technical assistance and support to each of the tribes in obtaining these funds. So what is it that we can do to help you leverage these funds? What kind of phone calls? Do you need me to be objective? Do you need Cindy to provide you the technical assistance? Do you need a sounding board for these projects? That's where we're really starting. So if you contact us and you say, I've got an idea for this bridge project, I'd really like to get it off the ground. It's part of a historical program. So we can start there and then do a search. And then Cindy will be able to walk us through one of those resources and teach us how to navigate that system because it is pretty dynamic. So here's some of the things that we're going to talk about today. How are we going to expand our efforts? How are we searching for funding opportunities? And most importantly, The intent of these office hours is to give you the sounding board at a regular time on a regular day for us to consistently be here to address those reoccurring questions, especially for people who may not have a lot of capacity to do these projects independently. We'd like to partner with you. And by partner, we mean time, energy, and effort. Okay, so what is the task force? So we are an offshoot of the state task force, which is much broader, and that's composed of a lot of state agencies. But a lot of the other agencies are more focused on local municipalities, and we felt that we needed a specific entity just to deal with tribal eligible projects. So the Governor's Office of Tribal Relations has formed the BILJA Task Force to specifically serve tribal communities and tribal enterprises. So as for Cindy and I, will be here to provide opportunities for information sharing and technical assistance. So our success depends on working together with you so that we can continue to design and initiate programs to stimulate growth, both on and off tribal land. And as I mentioned before, Cindy and I, our time is dedicated specifically just to work with representatives of tribes. So here's a graphic that explains how this once in a generation investment looks like on a bigger scale. So of the total BILJA projects, over $567 million is dedicated to the Department of Transportation. And then as you see, the pie starts to decrease in size. The next great portion of that belongs to the Department of Commerce with $48 billion. So we're talking billions with the B and not just the M. And what's important here is that we're just not talking about, okay, Cindy and I are going to be running the task force for a month. No, we are actually committed to seeing this project through the life of the BILJA program. So we are talking 5 years. So whether you have a project that's ready to start considering some of those grant opportunities, or you're at a much earlier planning stage, now is a really good time to pull out those projects and really think, what can we get done and how can we get started? So that's where we're going to start with most people. And there's a lot of other tribes who are more advanced, but again, each tribe is different. So when you're thinking about these projects that you have or you've always wanted to do, this is the opportunity to think big. Do you have an old master planning project? Are there some water tanking or other water infrastructure projects that you've always wanted to do but never had the ability to do because the funding wasn't there? So good news, the funding is here now and it'll be available and rolled out over the next 5 years. So again, let's start together and start planning those pieces so that everyone can be successful. This is once in a generation funding and the largest investment in Indian country in American history. And this type of funding is not likely to be repeated in our lifetime. So it's important that we get it right. We're all asking ourselves to think collectively and to look for collaborative and partnership opportunities. So we welcome any calls or suggestions on what it is that we can do to improve not just your community, but the state of Arizona. Okay, so revisit your wish list. What is it that you, under the most extenuating circumstances, everybody has a wish list. So what is it that you want on your wish list? What is it that we can possibly do to make those things come to fruition? And thank goodness we have Cindy, because Cindy has a long track record of being successful in pursuing these opportunities. And I think she's actually worked with a few tribes during the pandemic. So she's had some experience in getting some of those large projects off the ground. So what else are we thinking about? Bold thinking is inclusive thinking. with this level of historic funding, we want to look beyond the traditional boundaries and work collaboratively. So we want to maximize these dollars. For strategic planning and partnering efforts will be more sustainable and resilience in addressing our future needs, and to make your applications more competitive. And Cindy, if you want to jump in at any time, feel free to do so.
Yeah, sure. When I was thinking about this, when we talk about bold thinking being inclusive thinking, a lot of times what that really means is looking beyond our traditional boundaries, our specific program areas, right? We come to the table a lot of times with a specific type of project in mind. Typically, as you see, the infrastructure funds overwhelmingly are being sent to the Department of Transportation, but 25% is really asking us to think bigger, right? And Christine and I were just talking to a tribe the other day. It's not just infrastructure funds, right? A tribe did come to us about a tourism project, and we might think it's just that one small project, but just being able to have that conversation, we started to talk about what are the opportunities, what are the possibilities around that, very small project for this one grant opportunity. Again, non-infrastructure, but how could we support the development of that one specific project by taking a look a little bit more globally and holistically to see to kind of grow the economic impact of that one project alone. So I think, we've been having some great conversations along those lines. Again, infrastructure programs, non-infrastructure programs, but the point is thinking comprehensively and planning something that's kind of bigger than the sum of its parts, and over the next 5 years could really grow the economy of that particular tribe. And again, starts out as a very, very small conversation. And I think what it really means is like the more heads, the better, the more brains, the better, even if it's the ability to bounce ideas off one another and to see if something sticks. And if it does, and if there's an interest within the tribe itself, part of what we could do too is maybe bring other folks to the table to have have those conversations with a broader audience. So we're kind of looking beyond our traditional boundaries. So at a minimum, I think we offer the opportunity to brainstorm, toss ideas off each other, and again, ask bigger questions of others. And so if there's an interest in that, of course, we're available. And to be frank, if to the extent that we want to carry that further and you do need some technical assistance, or you do need to decide to pursue a grant application, because with the infrastructure bill, that grant application really is the tools of the trade. This is how we seek funding. We do have to put together a grant application. There's it's both an art and a science. Within the federal world, it's very specific, and we can help you kind of sift through that too. If you want to take that on yourself, we can, help you work through the notice of funding opportunity. And I think perhaps we do have the ability to work on an application as well, if that's what you feel you need and that's what you'd like. So I think the theme of this is, we're fairly open. It is Christine and I, but we're open and we're willing to kind of take on anything that you'd like to the extent that you have an interest.
Cindy, one thing that I'd like to mention is that when we have had some of these meetings with tribes, it's usually just one person focused on the project. So yes, maybe you want to build, for example, 5 miles through what was previous washboard roading. Great, but what other levels on top of that have you been considering? What are you considering, or is there a possibility about installing broadband? Just the conduit into that highway? Like, is there some tourism possibilities that can be done along that route? What about pedestrian ways? So it's not just about having the person leading the project, it's about all those other tribal programs that can support it to make it more cohesive. So how is your education departments involved in this planning project? How are your tribal colleges involved? What about your IT manager or your local chamber of commerce? How are all these entities coming together to make the project bigger and more robust? And that was one thing that we mentioned to a project earlier this week, is like, you have some great bones, but your master planning is so far advanced that we need to really focus on the running water and the roads. So let's go, take a lot of steps back to go back to that original project and build that out a little bit more. And that will probably help us to find the financing to get those projects done.
Christine, yeah, you raise a perfect point. Most folks come into the process because a notice of funding opportunity has been published, right? And they're all about the project. And, since December, there've been over 100 notices of funding opportunities published. So I think from the human perspective, we see those things and we want to see if we can throw our hat into the ring. And what we're doing here, particularly on this slide, we're talking about the benefits of strategic planning and partnering. Because that is absolutely necessary. And with the infrastructure bill, while you're going to be putting in an application for your project, you're always going to have to address other things that are consistent, that are a requirement of the bill itself. When we're talking about equity, we're talking about sustainability, we're talking about workforce development. How is your project, or how are you as the applicant addressing all of these things? Because we're looking at those things as outcomes for your project. If this is the first time you've thought of these things, as a result of the NOFO being published, you're kind of behind the 8 ball there, right? Because you're trying to think of it in context of something that is really better served by a comprehensive strategic planning effort. And it's really the planning process that draws in the appropriate partners to the table, where you talk through things like, how do we build a sustainable economy? How do we make it resilient? All over the news yesterday, right, is about the flooding through monsoons, right? But then it's a result of the wildfires. There's a lot of issues with regard to climate change in the state of Arizona. Indian tribes can play a huge part in the solution of that. So how can you take a look at a road project, for example, and talk about resiliency in context of climate change? Who else needs to be at the table? So all of a sudden, you're taking a look at something very specific that, you start to address comprehensively, and by its very nature, you start to bring in your partners, whether it's your environmental department, whether it's your housing department, whether it's the Forest Service. The time to think about it is in the planning stages. And by the time you get to that application, 80% of what that application is going to ask you to address, you can probably pull out of the narrative of that plan, right? The statement of work for your actual project is just a small piece of that application. And of course, we're going to have to do that well, and you're going to have to, put a budget together and lots of other things. But those larger questions, those less tangible questions that you're going to have to address in that application, is really better served by going through the strategic planning process. And a pipeline of projects, right? We talk about shovel-ready projects or shovel-worthy projects. How do we determine if they're shovel-worthy or not? And a common question that a reviewer might ask you in your application is like, why this project but not some other project? Again, a good solid planning process leads to a pipeline of projects for which, by its very virtue, you've demonstrated the need for those projects, and you've decided what the outcomes are that you're looking for, and how those projects will solve those problems for you.
Cindy, I think the best analogy that I can think for this, what we're trying to accomplish here, is that we are trying to plan a big breakfast. So who's going to host the breakfast? Who's bringing the eggs? Are we going to have bacon? What about the fruit and pastries? And then let's not forget about table settings and placemats. Do we need name tags? So as we start planning these things, there's always going to be somebody else for the next meeting that needs to be brought to the table. And that goes for the state side too. So although it's just Cindy and I think our level of expertise can be limited simply because I am not an expert on water, or don't have that civic engineering to talk about pounds per pressures, things like that, of that nature. So that's where the other IIJA task force comes in, because although it's just Cindy and I, we do have other assets available to us that we can bring to the table and start talking about some of these projects together. And it's not just one meeting. Usually it's a series of meetings. And the reason is because we need to make sure that we're all on the same table before we start applying for that money. And of course, who's going to own that money and distribute it? So,
well, number one, I love the food analogy, number one, but I completely agree, right? So say for someone like me, I have this brilliant idea or this vision that I want to have this amazing breakfast and I want to invite all my friends. But then when I get right down to it, I don't have the talent to make the eggs, or I don't have the talent. So while I've got this idea, I recognize very quickly that it's not going to be successful if it's me just working on my own. And that in order for me to do it well, I should reach out to my partners. I should reach out to my friends who I know can do certain things much better than me. And then once we start working together, it becomes bigger than my original vision, right? And it becomes more spectacular. And the return on investment, the number of people that really benefit from that is frankly amazing. So yeah, I think that the breakfast analogy is a good one. I think I'm gonna steal that one, Christine.
all right, okay. But then we're talking 5 years, so right now we're planning for breakfast. Hopefully next year we can plan for lunch, and then the year after that, dinner, and then maybe after we have this whole thing put together, we'll have a big feast at the end,
Feast.
right?
Yep.
So that's what we're really working towards. All right, let's go to the next slide. Okay, making new plans. So Cindy mentioned the word shovel worthy, and that's really the key to the BILJA program. Cindy, do you want to touch on what shovel worthy means?
Yes. Yeah. And if there's anyone around who kind of can go back to the old ARA days, we were just coming out of the recession, right? And there was a whole lot of money that came out under ARA, in which we were really looking for shovel ready projects, literally ready to shovels in the ground, and we're going to start building. I think we recognized over time that was a somewhat flawed strategy. There were a lot of good projects done, but then there were a lot of good projects because they weren't ready in that way that just never got funded, right? And so we don't want to dismiss those projects. Shovel worthy, what that really means is those are projects for which already a lot of good thought has gone into. And again, we're going back to the planning process, right? That those projects are really the result of a comprehensive planning process with some bold thinking, such that, as a result of those collaborations and those partnerships, that you have developed a pipeline of projects that have outcomes that have also been identified in your planning process. Those projects are shovel worthy, right? They're worthy because, through the planning process, you've gone through the collaboration, you've demonstrated the need, you've got the data to support that. So now you're ready to take the next step and pursue that particular project. It doesn't mean you're ready to build it. It means that you're ready to pursue funding for that project. And I think that's the primary difference, because I think a lot of people were shortchanged there. They had good ideas. They were going through the process. Were they ready to go to construction? No. And they could not. So we've all learned from that. And I think, to the credit of the infrastructure bill and the folks that have, put this together, they recognize that. And so they've improved upon it. And that does give us the time. And that's what I like. So, we're well into year one. Excuse me, we're well into year one, and maybe you think you don't have the time, but we still do have the time. We still have the time to think it through and put together a series of projects that can really succeed in the long haul. And so that's really what that means. Plan long-term in a holistic manner, develop that project pipeline so that when you pursue that individual project, you put that application together, you're really referencing it back to where that need was identified and the problem that this project will solve.
Cindy, we're going to talk about this later, but I think it goes to say that these office hours aren't the only thing we'll be offering. So again, each tribe is different. Each tribe is at a different stage of development. But sometimes I feel like some groups will get caught at a point where things become so complicated that it's going to take more than just an office hour. So how are we going to address those issues? By having a town hall to talk about it. What are the challenges? And we haven't mentioned this yet, but commenting periods. Cindy, you want to talk about commenting periods real quick?
Yeah, sure. So, in the infrastructure bill itself, we see, I would say, two types of funds. There are formula funds for which there's no competition. formula funds are allocated by formula in the bill itself to states and tribes. The Department of Energy, for example, put together as a large formula program for which in the bill itself, there's the specific allocated amount in the bill for all states and all Indian tribes. You're still going to have to put an application together for that, but you are not going to have to compete for that. The second type of funding is really discretionary grants, and that's kind of what we're always talking about. But even within those two pots of funding, we can also break the infrastructure bill down into two pieces: the existing programs that are generally receiving lots more funding that they have in previous years, and then also new programs for which funding has been established, but the programs themselves have not. And so to stand up a new program at the federal level, it's a process, which is why, if you're searching for that funding at all, you're seeing it's taking quite a while. It's because that these federal agencies are still trying to stand up the program. And because it's really not the agency's funds, these are taxpayer dollars, right? So there is a public responsibility to make sure that the way the program is administered is reflective of the way the public would like to see that run within the constraints of the statute itself. So there will always be a request for comment period before a notice of funding opportunity is issued. And a lot of times that does also involve tribal consultation. So it's another opportunity, even after the bill was passed, it's another opportunity for you to weigh in on how that program is administered. And just in the few months that I've been here in Arizona, we've talked about the impact of this vocabulary, for example, maybe unintended consequences, but the way the statute is written unintentionally affects even still rural Arizona and Indian tribes in a way that perhaps wasn't intended, but there is an impact, right? So that request for comment period is a way for you to say, this is what this means for my tribe. And maybe it's working really well, but maybe it's not really going to work so well. So there is really no discretion to change what's already written in law. But these federal programs do have what we also call administrative criteria, and there is some discretion there. So, put your comments in there. They will be public. You will be able to read everybody's comments. And to some extent, that can change the way the program will be administered. And they will tell you right away, we can't change this because this is the law. But based on this feedback, we're going to shift things a little bit differently. So in the request for comment, the program office will generally tell you like, hey, this is how we're thinking we're going to run this program. And before we finalize that, we have a couple of questions in which we'd like you to weigh in. You can answer those questions and you can also enter your own comments. We're going to, those notices are published just like the notices of funding opportunities. They're called many things. They're called request for information, request for comments. Those are some of the things that we're going to highlight too in our newsletter. And I think there were at least 2 requests for comments that we published in our first newsletter. And of course, if you have any questions about that, we can certainly talk that through a little bit more. And, Christine, when you talk about, if we want to do a deeper dive here, get into some subject matter that's a little bit beyond the scope of these webinars, we're also going to be listening to your questions, and we'd like to put together a frequently asked question list too, so that we'll ask the question here, and if we can answer it here, that's great. But we want to make those answers available to everyone. And I think when we start to see patterns, 50% of the questions are about this one specific topic. I think it's an opportunity for us to perhaps even do a deeper dive. Maybe we'll hold a workshop on that, and we'll just kind of focus on that. And that's really dependent on you. So to the extent that you do have questions about very specific areas, I think that, between Christine and I, we're more than happy to do a deeper dive and perhaps hold a webinar specifically on those topics. And so again, we're open on that.
All right, let's go to the next slide. Okay, again, make use of every available resource. The BILJA Task Force is engaging tribal nations and communities to leverage all available resources and to help to deliver technical assistance and build long-term capacity. And there are resources out there too beyond what we're talking about here, but part of our commitment is to be able to continuously share and update these resources. good example of that was the newsletter you received to be here today. And based on the feedback that I've gotten from a lot of tribal leaders is that, of course, they're deluged with emails. And of course, everyone is really important. And I hope that my information is important too, but out of respect for, all these notices about the same thing, we're only going to send out one newsletter a week. And so we started with a small sample, and as time goes by, the list will grow. And of course, it will change based on the feedback of our participants. Okay, so what are these resources that we've been talking about? We're just going to put a few of them. And again, there's many, many, many different websites for you to rely on. We have selected these specifically because it seems like they're the most useful and of all user friendly. And we have another strategy that we're trying to put in place to advertise on the BILJA website. So Cindy, would you like to talk about build.gov?
Yes, absolutely. And this is a webinar today, of course, so it's not really interactive, but what we've tried to put together are what I feel are two very good resources. And I'll tell you why I think so. There's a lot of information on the infrastructure bill itself, and it's being provided by a whole lot of folks, including ourselves, right? And people are trying to reach their various constituencies and trying to help. It's a lot to sift through. My general rule of thumb is the best information is some primary source information. And clearly the primary source of information is what's coming out of the White House. Every other source that you see out of there is some variation of some information that is taken from this source. So here it is, it's build.gov, very simple, very easy to remember. The website's up here, but increasingly I'm starting to use these QR codes. You can pull it up on your mobile phone and you can start to search. There is a guidebook. It's a giant guidebook. It's over 400 pages, and you can read that if you want. And I think it's worth it to read at least the sections that you're interested in. And I can pick it up a month later and I learn more from what I'm reading just because I have a month's more experience. So I feel it's always good to go back to that on occasion. What I think is really nice on this website too is they have put all of the programs into kind of a database or a spreadsheet that you can filter by project type, whether or by program or by eligibility. So say you want to see all the programs for which tribes are eligible, you can go into the eligibility column and just put in tribes. If you're interested in something on water, you can just type in water. If you're interested in a specific program like the Tribal Transportation Program, you can type that in and then you can see what's up there. And that's a really good tool. Next slide. And so this is what that spreadsheet looks like on that build.gov website. This is what it looks like. So what we've tried to do here for you, rather than just going to build.gov and getting that whole website, you can use this QR code and go directly to the guidebook itself, or you can scan this QR code too and go right to this program database. And so what you can see here on the screen, you can see, whether it's the agency name, eligibility, funding opportunity. You can click on that and you can start to search. So again, it's a very good way to look at those programs. Next slide. But I will share with this with you. This one's my favorite, right? So, and one of the reasons it's my favorite is because the information on this website is directly updated from anytime the White House updates the information that we just shared with you, you will see the information immediately updated on the National Governors Association website. That said, I feel it's a bit friendlier and it adds a little bit more information. And that's really where, to be honest with you, that's where the information is coming from when Christine and I provide you that calendar, right? What's available? What's available in August specifically? What are some deadlines coming up in September? This to me is the benefit of this website. So and I feel it's just a little bit more user friendly, and that extra column that they've added. So you want to search programs, but you want to see for yourself, hey, has a NOFO been published in the last 30 days? Is there a NOFO that's been out there that has an impending deadline that I might take advantage of. This particular website will help you with that too. And of course, you can still scan, you can still filter by tribal eligibility, or even like resiliency programs, for example. We want to try to address resiliency. We want to try to address workforce. We want to try to address wildfires. You can type in it, same way, type in that in the search, and you'll see what kinds of programs come up there too. And of course, the QR code takes you right to that.
Okay, so we've shared with you some of the resources, and as you get to see these and you need more clarification, this is where we can be instrumental to you. Of course, we know you have access to all your other contacts and everything like that, but sometimes there are people out there who don't know where to start. So that's where we're going to help people, is we're going to be that hopefully missing link for them. Do you need clarification? Do you need a direct contact? What type of technical assistance are you looking for? Maybe you don't want to be the prime applicant. What other entities that are out there that may be willing to partner with you? And this is something that's really focused around broadband too, is getting the local municipalities and the counties and tribes all together to pursue these big projects so that we can increase redundancy and access to broadband throughout the entire state. Okay, going back to this presentation, what else can we do to connect you? We can provide an objective review. We can discuss capacity issues. Our goal is just to help everyone be successful. How is it that we can provide assistance to you? Okay, on this last side here is Cindy's full contact information, my contact information, and the BILJA website. And we're going to go through the website in just a moment, but we also have a dedicated email list. So if you see this presentation and you decide, okay, I'm just going to ask a simple question and see where it goes, Cindy and I will receive that and we will get back to you and schedule time and go from there. Okay, and I think that concludes the presentation. So let us go and look at the website. So the website is hosted by the Governor's Office of Tribal Relations, and it talks about how the Infrastructure Investment Jobs Act and the Bipartisan Infrastructure Law Jobs Act are in the same entity. They're just known by different acronyms depending on where you're getting your information, but it's the same pot of money. So what is the function of the BILJA Task Force? Well, we just went through some of that. We're sharing funding opportunities, new program policy and guidance, and that comes through our newsletter. And then hopefully as time goes by, we'll be able to provide technical assistance, establish a network to share success stories, and of course, provide town halls where the dialogue is going to be more robust, and we're gonna need a lot more than an hour to digest it. So today is the launch. And then on September 1st, we'll have our next one. And as these things go on, we'll have guest speakers to talk a little bit about other opportunities that might be available to you. So how do you become involved? So let's go back to the big breakfast. Okay, we need a coordination team. So somebody from land use, transportation, telecom, broadband, all those things that we need to make our big breakfast. Who are the groups there that need to be invited and just at the table to sort things out? We suggest designated one person to represent your community on the task force, sign up to receive the information, and then participate on these calls as it pertains to you and your availability. So here's some of those resources that we talked about earlier and just a few more. And if you have not already signed up, we have that at the bottom of the web page as well. So let's go to the newsletter, and this is the last piece, I think. So this is our newsletter. You're only going to get once a week. You did receive two. It's because you signed up and we gave you this huge welcome notice that says you're going to like it here because you're only going to get one email. But generally speaking, this is what the newsletter will look like. It'll have a brief announcements, remind you of what the office hours is for that week, if there is one, If there is an event, provide whatever opportunities there might be for that week. So Cindy, I think we're going to have to nail down the content a bit more.
Mhm.
But here's the contact, and then I will probably have to add our contact information at the bottom of the newsletter too. So, but for all intents and purposes, that was the information that we wanted to share today. Cindy, would you like to add any more comments?
Yeah, I think the one thing I'd like to add, Christine, is that our website will continue to build, right? So for example, we're recording this session today, and whether you can make it or not, you can always use the website as a resource to look at this website at your leisure, at lunch or something like that. And again, we want to build out the FAQs, any other information that we're kind of putting together that we can share with folks. The website itself is, I would consider this a form of technical assistance as well. So keep checking in when it's convenient for you to see, what information we've put up there to share with you.
Okay, great. We don't have any questions, so just a brief reminder that the next office hours will be on September 1st at 10 a.m. Registration will be required. If you do have projects that you would like to discuss, again, feel free to reach out at any time. But in any case, thank you so much for your time and energy, and we look forward to working with you on these important projects.
Thank you.
Thank you.